1867 Sports Show episode number Brett Hull
Look at
tonight.
us go.
Look at us go. Good job to us. Good job to Brett Hull. Number 16 coming at you, live and hot on a nice Tuesday evening, but really Wednesday or Thursday, whenever you guys are listening to this show. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that Connor McDavid just got his 13th assist in last night's game. So, anyways, I'm riding on cloud nine right now. It was a great start to the series last night. For once, we're not losing the opening game to LA. Just putting the boots to them and setting the tone nice and early. So Kyle, what's going on, man? How you doing? How you feeling?
Well, I was gonna say Connor McDavid goes out there, regular season, 100 assists. Edmonton plays 20 playoff games. You could have 100 playoff assists this season as well too. So, not bad for an encore for him, I guess, out there. But Oilers fans can do a little victory lap right now because they're
Good
looking
start.
pretty good, good. And what's nice too is multiple Canadian teams who aren't just happy to be there type contenders. We've got a few teams who could be going fairly deep into the postseason. So
they're competing. They're competing.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about it last week, prior to the playoffs, because they really hadn't had the playoff matchup set yet. So now that we're kind of in it, we're a couple days behind, but we figured, let's break.
Still had to have John Tortorella pulling a goalie there to throw things into chaos on game 82 of the season. So we didn't want to put the cart in front of the horse. Needed the playoffs to be set first here.
Exactly. We could have been foreshadowing things, but instead we decided to wait and just kind of analyze things as they came up. So again, let's start off talking about the playoff breakdown of all four Canadian teams. And obviously, we're mentioning the Oilers and their absolutely dominant win last night. So, I figured it would be fun to kind of talk about what's the one thing for each of these teams that they're going to need for playoff success this year, right? We all know the Connor McDavids of the world for Edmonton. He's essential to their success. Austin Matthews for Toronto, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about one thing that might be outside of the box or a secondary player that really could stoke the flame to really bring one of these Canadian teams to prominence again for the first time since 1993. It's got to happen eventually, right?
Year 31 of the drought that we're now on here north of the border.
Did you see that commercial? I forget if it's Sportsnet or it's a beer commercial where they have all the Canadian teams their last Stanley Cup appearance, and like they show Canucks 1994, and there's like a hole punch in the drywall. Yeah. And then they keep going on and on. It's so good. Like, I don't know who did it, but it's very well done.
Honestly, whoever does some of these NHL playoffs marketing, because let's call it what it is, out of the big four leagues, like NHL does a pretty piss poor job of actually marketing itself. But whoever's in charge of their playoff montages and, you go back because it's the cup and all these moments. You never forget your first kiss of everyone always kissing the Stanley Cup. And, these kind of iconic things that they really take their game to the next level. So whoever this unknown individual is there, I'm just assuming some Don Draper Mad Men suit wearing guy there, but he's earning every penny of his paycheck for sure.
Yeah. And I know you're not a Leafs fan, but if you've seen the Leafs and Bruins breakdown where Max Domi's kind of going through and he's narrating it, and you see it opening up with Ty Domi bouncing him on his knee when they're opening up the playoffs back in like 2001 or 2. It's so cool, and they do such a good job with it. So yeah, again, let's get a golf clap for the playoff montages that the league's putting out there. But yeah, let's start breaking it down. And I mean, obviously, I started talking about the Oilers. We can start with them.
Weird how that happened.
Weird.
Oilers right at the top of the gamut there. Eh?
I mean, you got to save the best for first, so let's go with that.
That's definitely how that saying goes.
But maybe name me a player that you think really needs to be the catalyst for Edmonton to take that next step and make that cup run this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we kind of said off the top, as far as the parameters go here, Connor McDavid goes out there and puts up 5 points every night. It's going to be a pretty smooth sail throughout the rest of the postseason.
It really doesn't matter.
Yeah. But for me, Listen, you as an Oilers fan know this probably better than most, right? The goaltending has been very, very suspect over the years. And cousin Stu out there, he's getting probably his best chance at taking a
Mm-hmm.
team deep into the postseason of his professional career thus far. He's not a all-world Vezina style candidate goaltender, but we have seen some goaltenders get hot at the right time, and we don't need you to be good for 82 games. We need you to go out there and get 16 wins for us here.
Yeah.
And when you're behind one of the league's best power plays, one of the best offenses, that's obviously going to cover up a few of the warts, because saw it in game one. Wouldn't exactly put that on his career highlight reel, but was good enough to get the
Yeah.
job done. And I think that's really what it boils down to here,
Yeah.
right? I always love it when because Grant Fuhr is actually pretty active on Twitter and social media and that, and I think he name searches himself a lot, because anytime someone brings up the fact of like, how the heck is this guy in the Hall of Fame and all these cups and this, that, the other, and like he'll clap back at him, where it's like, listen, I just know that if my team scores 5, I need to stop all but 4.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to be track meets. I don't think there's going to be a lot of 1-0 games, whether it's against the Kings or at any point throughout their playoff run here. But can he be good enough to get them through? And I really think that, you and I both identified the fact that we would have liked to have seen kind of that veteran goaltender pickup at the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we're going to see whether that inaction, we'll call it, is going to rear its ugly head there, because if he all of a sudden goes out and back-to-back games, gets chased out of the net by the second period, where does Edmonton kind of go from there, right?
Yeah.
That's where he would have loved to have had although it was a pipe dream there, like a Marc-Andre Fleury type or something like that, who could have come in and, steadied the ship for a little bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, they made a really good point last night, though, with Stuart Skinner. And before I get into that, I actually thought he played pretty well last night. He made some big saves when he needed to, and the goals that were scored against them, I mean, I'm watching it, and it's like those are legitimate goals. And I mean, you look at LA versus Edmonton, like Kempe literally turns into the next coming of Luc Robitaille when they play the Oilers. So I mean, it's expected that they're going to go on a run. I mean, they've got some good veterans in there. So but I digress. The point that was made last night was last year when Stuart Skinner let in maybe 1 or 2 or even 3, Woodcroft was quick to yank him, right? It's like he didn't give him a chance to get his feet underneath him. And that really screws with the goaltender's confidence when you take a goalie out too soon. And I think that even with the scenario of letting up, like you were saying, the 4 goals, if you know your team's going to score 5 or 6, hey, keep your guy in there. Let him get those big moments and let him feel the confidence of winning a game, right? I mean, I look at when they went on their little mini run 2 years ago when Mike Smith was in there, and he was terrible.
Yeah.
But the one thing that really separated, that run versus last year was that Mike Smith got more confidence as the playoffs went along. And when he needed to make a big save, he made it. Yeah. So that's what I really think is key for Stuart Skinner to really take Edmonton to the next step, is getting that confidence every game. And I mean, I think that once he kind of, establishes himself as, what, got 37 shots last night, stopped 33 of them. That's pretty good. I know that they're going to get their chances, but I also have the confidence that my guys are just flying right now, because they've got all 4 lines buzzing every time they're on the ice. So as a goalie, you got to feel very confident with that. So I agree with that. And, that was going to be mine too, but I'll pick another one just because I don't want to, talk about the same person every time. The last time Edmonton made a run to the Cup was in 2006. And the main driving factor behind that was they had an all-world defenseman who was just taking over every single game in Chris Pronger. And I think this is the opportunity for Evan Bouchard to really take that next step up to become that elite defenseman. We know that he's a puck mover. We know he's got the boosh bomb from the point. He's a power play specialist. This is where you kind of take that step from being the power play specialist to being the catalyst behind the entire team. When you're on the ice with your defense partner, you know that the other team is not going to touch the puck. And I mean, I think between him and Ekholm playing together, that's such a good defensive pairing that I think those two could really kind of solidify Edmonton as that cup contender in a serious matter. And yeah, I mean, I think you look at kind of how they're built. I really look at them as being kind of that mid 90s to late 90s New Jersey Devils type team, right? On the blue line, not talking about up front.
I was going to say,
yeah,
I don't know how trappy they're going to be getting here with a 1-3-1, but
no. I'm talking about on the blue line because I mean, you look at what Bouchard really brings to the table. He's kind of like that Scott Niedermayer, Brian Rafalski type of defenseman, right? Not really big, great skater, great with the puck, great vision. But those guys evolved into those two-way defensemen, right? They started out as offensive guys and evolved in those two-way guys. You've got kind of that veteran presence back there. And I mean, I'm not comparing Matthias Ekholm to Scott Stevens, but that's kind of what you get out of that. He's been around. He's been in some battles, obviously playing with Nashville for all those years. He knows what it takes to kind of elevate the other guys around him, right? And then you've just got a group of steady defensemen outside of that, right? I mean, everyone gets on Darnell Nurse because of the money he makes and whatnot. I have no problem with Darnell Nurse. He's a great top four defenseman, and people can get after me with that however you want. The bottom line is the guy plays big minutes. He kills penalties. He can play on the power play if you need him to. So as a whole, the defensive core for Edmonton really does establish more confidence in me as a fan this year than ever before. And having a guy like Bouchard being really that next guy up to become the catalyst, I think can really take them into the next stratosphere.
Yeah. And I think you look back at that acquisition of Ekholm a few seasons back there, it didn't get kind of the fanfare that I think, it rightly deserved, right? And I think it's mostly because his game is kind of tailor fitted to that postseason, get mean, durable, big minutes, playing against the other team's top line, shutting them down. Like all of those things aren't sexy regular season stats, right? They're not going to jump off the page at you, but you need multiple guys like that if you're going to even have a chance at hoisting Lord Stanley's mug when all is said and done. And so pairing him up with someone who's got a lethal shot from the point like Bouchard there is tremendous for them. And a Darnell Nurse, same thing. Like his regular season, you need heavy bodies, and there's a lot of talk about the physicality and playing heavy just in the first couple of games that have happened so far in the playoffs. And I think people until you've kind of been in that, or you've been watching a lot of deep playoff runs and are starting to pick up on the patterns, it's not going to be those, Willie Nylanders of the world and whatnot, who we'll get to in a minute there, but that are going to be real, true difference makers there. It's going to be a lot of unsung heroes. It's going to be the guys that go into the corner. It's going to be the guys that are laying out 8 to 10 hits a night. Like it's going to be a lot of people stepping up and doing unglamorous things that ultimately propel them forward and allow the Connor McDavids and the Dreisaitl's of the world to go out there and focus on putting the puck in the net. So I like that pick as well too. And put it on its head, kind of reversal of fortune, because for the longest time, blue line and goaltending weren't very promising out west there for you.
No, they were not. And like I said, it's nice to have. And I mean, even watching the third pairing, with a guy like Brett Kulak, I think he's one of the most unheralded players in the entire league. Great skater, he's smart, he's physical, it needs to be. And I mean, they're just fun to watch now. It's not like, oh, this person's on the ice. Oh, okay, I gotta be on pins and needles now. You're confident with your entire roster. So, anyways, Oilers were in a good spot. But again, another team that got out to a really good start. Will stay out west, Vancouver. I mean, your pick to make it the furthest out of all the Canadian teams earlier this year, and they didn't disappoint in their first game. And I mean, obviously, that barn is something else when it's rocking.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the players even came out and said like it got us emotional when they started to really get ramped up in pregame, and it never stopped. And
Yeah.
that really feeds a team when they're on the ice. And one guy that I think is really the ultimate driver of this team. And we can talk about unsung heroes. We can talk about how many goals the Canucks put up because they're very talented team. But I'm going to stick with the blue line, and like Quinn Hughes is definitely the guy who needs to be the guy if Vancouver is going to overtake a lot of these strong teams in the West Coast. And this guy's got all the talent in the world. He's arguably one of the top 3 defensemen in all the NHL when he's on. And if he can really become that point a game player in the playoffs like he was in the regular season, I think you're going to see Vancouver making a deep run, because whenever you can get, like, we spoke about it with Edmonton's defensive core, whenever you can get your top guy really kind of taking over things, everyone else follows suit.
Yeah.
And if he's steering the ship, you've got your forwards that are kind of following suit, and they're going to be scoring goals. You've got your defensemen that are going to be, working extra hard to get the puck out so that way they can go down and, put the puck in the other net. And obviously with the loss of Thatcher Demko for who knows how long now, it becomes even more important for the defense to really step up and, limit those chances that Nashville's going to have, coming back in the attacking zone. So Quinn Hughes, I know it's not really the sleeper pick that maybe some people are expecting, but he's got to be the guy if Vancouver's making a deep run.
Yeah, you really went deep on their roster to pull that name out of the hat there, right? But
I mean, I could say Philip Hronek too, but
yeah. You're absolutely right, though, right? Like, if jokes aside here, if the Vancouver Canucks are going to go on a deep run, Hughes needs to have a Conn Smythe style postseason. And he's definitely the straw that stirs that drink out west. So he's definitely a worthy choice. I thought about going Demko, but then with the injuries, it's like, okay, well, who even knows? Everything in the postseason is just cloak and daggers. And, he could have ruptured his hip clean off the bone. And we'll just say, it's just a flesh wound there. We'll just cortisol shots in the way he goes. But so I went in a bit of a different direction here in terms of someone who, if he can get his game going, watch out for the Vancouver Canucks. And it's our friend, Mr. Elias Lindholm here, because they paid a pretty penny to acquire him. Mixed results, I think, is kind of fair to say post trade deadline there. He definitely didn't step into the role that I think the front office kind of thought he would. I think based on how top heavy, and we've already talked about that on previous episodes, this lineup is, as far as, when Pettersson and all of them are firing on all cylinders. I think they had over 50% of the points or something at one point in the season. So they kind of hoped that he would come in and be that second line center and drive some secondary scoring. I think in the postseason here, you could slide him down a little bit further, and all of a sudden, if he's on the third line and they're generating some offense up and down throughout that lineup and getting a little bit more balance, that really unlocks their offensive potential here. If they get pinned into a corner, and you know what, like, who knows, anything can happen in the postseason, but I would be pretty shocked if Nashville bounced them in the first round. I think whoever they end up matching up against in round 2, they're going to have a much tougher time and will need a lot more secondary scoring than what they're probably going to need to get past the Predators here. So if you can get Lindholm he doesn't even need to get back to, what he was doing out in Calgary, but if he can increase his production 20-25% based on what he was doing down the stretch, that's huge come postseason, because if you're going to be top line dependent and they're seeing the opposing teams shut down defenders all night, every time they're going over the boards, like, guess what the entire assistant coach's job is literally just keeping an eye on when's Pettersson on the ice. Okay, get the doors open. Here we go, boys. So if you have to rely on that, it's going to be a long, hard uphill battle. So you need secondary scoring here. And if he can take his game up a little bit, I'd feel a lot more confident about that Canucks pick.
Yeah, again, super good choice because I mean, Nashville's not really the team you look at to say they're the deep enough team that's going to make a run,
Yeah.
right? They might win one round and then they'll flame out in the second. But what they do have is depth down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at kind of where they are from 1 to 4. That's where Nashville really prides themselves on, attacking the other team, is having that depth at center. And when you can roll out a guy like Lindholm on your second or third line to really play plus hockey against some of these, deeper teams down the middle, Vancouver is going to put themselves in a great position. So, I mean, if he can win some faceoffs, if he can be a positive player whenever he's on the ice, so that means obviously limiting goals when you're on, and then producing that secondary scoring. That's the type of thing that really separates these teams that are good and have potential to, yeah, I have no questions about this team winning this series, right? Like you said, anything can happen, but you feel a lot more confident when you've got 2 to 3 and even 4 lines that you can roll out and say, you guys do what you need to do. Everyone's playing over 10 minutes a game. It's balanced so that way we're not wearing down over the course of a very grueling 4-round, Stanley Cup run. Because as we all know, winning a Stanley Cup is not for the faint of heart. And you need these guys to step up and take these big minutes off the table. So you're not rolling, Pedersen, Miller, Besser. You're not rolling them out 30 minutes a night and they're going to be done by midway through the second round. Yeah. So I love that pick.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see, especially with that Demko injury. I think there's a case to be made that there's not too many Canucks fans who are sleeping all that well heading into their next contest. But we'll see what ultimately ends up happening. Maybe they end up playing a little bit more cautious, and they're up in the series already. Give them an extra game, kind of a little bit more confident that what. Again, don't count your chickens before they hatch here, but. I think Nashville's kind of the happy to be here team out of all those teams out in the Western
100%.
Conference.
100%. Yeah. So, moving back, closer to the East, but we'll stay kind of in the Central. My pick for, between the Canucks and Winnipeg Jets as to who is going to advance further. Winnipeg got off to a very, very good start against, everyone's, perennial Stanley Cup favorite the last few years with Colorado. I mean, you had the whiteout going in Winnipeg after all the talk, that happened all season with, well, if we don't start selling out games, we're going to be in trouble and all the support's not there. Anyone who watched that game the other night knows that I think the fan base in Winnipeg is pretty strong and they still support their Jets pretty steadfast. So,
yeah,
I mean,
before we get to the players, let's give a little golf clap there to the Winnipeg faithful, showing out, silencing all the doubters there.
Yeah.
And, hopefully they go on a deep run.
Yeah, and I mean they're getting attention from the Pat McAfee show. Like they're blowing up right now, and and rightfully so, because again, the Jets are definitely the type of team that I think you could tell that they're a tight-knit squad, right? The fan base is really immersed into this team as well, which makes it even more fun and makes these teams that much more must-see TV as you're watching them in the playoffs. And I watched a little bit of the game the other night. I'm looking at kind of where they are because again, they're a deep team. They've got a lot of role players that play, exactly how they have to. They've got otherworldly goaltending who maybe didn't show up, on night one. But again, Mr. Hellebuck ended up coming out and saying, "Who cares what stats are like in the playoffs? Yeah. If we win the game, it doesn't matter." So my pick ultimately comes down to the guy who's been there the longest. He's really kind of the driver. He's the guy who's really come up as, the Winnipeg Jet, from from the inception, of the franchise when they moved back from Atlanta. And that's Mark Scheifele. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about, secondary scoring. We're talking about leadership. We're talking about, getting over the perennial hump that a lot of these teams are trying to get over. I think Mark Scheifele is really that guy who kind of embodies all of those things. Veteran presence. I think when you saw they needed a big goal, who scored it the other night? Mark Scheifele. When you were panning over to the bench, who's the one, even though he's not the captain of the team, Who's the one who's rallying the boys on the bench, rallying the guys on the ice? Mark Scheifele. Who's the guy that when you need a big face-off, Mark Scheifele's out there taking it, right? Like, this guy has kind of been the underrated superstar because he plays in a market like Winnipeg. People don't really get to see him that often. And obviously he's getting on in years, so he's kind of been moving down the depth chart a little bit with obvious the obvious talent that Winnipeg's been bringing in. But Mark Scheifele still plays such a pivotal role in the success of the Winnipeg Jet franchise. And if he can be that guy who can maybe be the point of game second line center, secondary scoring to really take the pressure off that top line, I think that the Jets have something, going really well there, because that Hellebuck's not going to let up another 6 goals. This is not going to happen. He's too good. Their defense is too good. I think that was just the opening night jitters. You're playing against a beast in the Colorado Avalanche. Now you've got game 1 under your belt. Let's go out in game 2, settle it down, and play the Winnipeg Jet brand of hockey, which is to shut down the opposing team.
Yeah.
So I think if you can get into that and really kind of control the pace and make Colorado play your game, this is exactly how Winnipeg is going to have success in round 1 at least. And then as you move forward, you have to adjust. But Mark Scheifele is the guy to me that if he can kind of be the one who's on everybody's lips as you're talking about the Winnipeg Jets success, they're going to go far in this year's playoffs.
Yeah. And it was a little bit of a uncharacteristic Jets game, right? In game 1 there, because to your point, they've gotten as far as they have based on solid goaltending, solid blue line, grinding out a lot of kind of low scoring affair wins, and you end up in a track meet. So the fact that they're able to go out there and still win in those types of environments has to bode well for their future.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, Colorado is an absolute wagon. So the fact that, you're able to keep up offensively with the likes of the McKinnons and whatnot of the world, that's, again, another huge boost going into their next game there with the crowd that's going to blow the lid off the MTS Center.
Yeah.
And I went in a bit of a different direction. I love the pick. Obviously, Scheifele is a huge, huge part of that offense. But to me, especially in round 1 here against an offensive juggernaut like the Avalanche, I got to go blue line here.
Yeah.
And the sexy or the easy pick is to go Josh Morrissey, right? Because very quietly, again, if you put Morrissey on like the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Montreal Canadiens, like
media darling,
all anyone's ever talking about. Right.
Yeah.
But because he's in Winnipeg, he just quietly goes out there and has evolved into a true superstar on the blue line, and probably one of the best defensemen that no one talks about in the entire league.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually going to go with his sometimes partner, which also breaks my heart because the Ottawa Senators shipped him away for an absolute pittance and decided to start throwing money at the Travis Hammoniks of the world and all of that for the exact same amount of money. So why that ended up happening, I'll never know. But Dylan DeMello is who I'm going to end up picking here, because you look at what he did in the regular season. Plus, I know plus minus isn't a stat that people bring up a lot anymore because, that's the old way of thinking it. You got to go Corsi. You've got to go like whatever. The guy was plus 46 in the regular season.
Which in any season is incredible, but in today's NHL, the fact that you can be anything above plus 20 is a really, really significant feat. So that's a crazy stat.
Yeah, especially when you're playing in the Western Conference, and McDavid put up 130 plus points there, and so did McKinnon there. So it's not like we're talking about the Jamie Benn 87 point Art Ross season here. Like, there were a lot of goals happening and they were playing those guys quite a bit. But you look at his game 1 log alone, right? 25 minutes that he's out there, and great that they went out there and won the game in a track meet, but they're gonna have success. He's gonna have to play a huge role in shutting down some of those high scoring forwards on the opponent's team there. And I think he's really emerged as kind of an unsung hero, dark horse, candidate here who plays a bigger role than people realize in their overall success. And, I kind of look at it as far as he's versatile. He can play top line minutes. He's with Morrissey. He's on the second penalty kill unit there. Like he can do everything that you want. And I kind of liken his game to maybe a little bit less offensive minded Drew Doughty, in the
Mhm.
sense of there was a while there where, guess what? Erik Karlsson was winning Norris trophies, but anyone who thinks Erik Karlsson is a defensive defenseman there, well, we need to have a talk about what hockey is here, because he's
Yeah.
not, right? But Drew Doughty, during that same stretch, wasn't putting up the offensive numbers he was, but was probably playing the best defense in the entire NHL. So if you were actually going to give the Norris trophy for the best defenseman, and I still think, there's an argument to be made,
Mhm.
Norris for the best defenseman, whatever, Bobby Orr for the best offensive
Yeah.
defenseman, split out two awards because they're
The Paul
different
Coffey
things.
Award.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You got to tie it back in there to your Oilers.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because Bobby Orr actually played defense.
Yeah. Sure. But there was an argument to be made that Doughty was probably the deserving winner if you actually read the fine print of what the award really was about. So that's kind of the vibes I'm getting as far as how he played down the stretch. And he is going to be someone who really, anytime you see a top, offensive producer, the McKinnons of the world, a Rantanen, something like that, hop over the boards, get ready to see him coming back the other way there as well, too, and play some pretty significant minutes against top line competition.
100%. And I mean, I love the fact that you took a defenseman who, like you said, sometimes he plays on the top line, sometimes he plays in the second pairing, sometimes he can mix in as a penalty killer, power play. Those guys are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
If you can have a versatile defenseman who can literally play with anybody, can play on any unit, because you don't have to, again, like we're talking about people who put you at ease when you're watching a game or coaching. That's a guy who puts you at ease. Rick Bowness must sleep well at night knowing that DeMello is a healthy defenseman who he can put out in any situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, 100%. I mean, had I not gone, because I had a couple of names for each team, and had I not gone defense with my first two, probably would have gone with somebody on the blue line for Winnipeg as well. But it's such an important factor that you brought up, because we all know Colorado's going to score.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's 3, whether it's 7, like they're going to put the puck in the net. They're just too good. So having your defensive core kind of collaborate together and really, take that step to say, we got to shut these guys down. So at least we're limiting them to 3, right? Because like we live in Colorado to 3, that's like shutting another team out, really. So if you can do that, 100%, I think that Winnipeg's going to make a deep run in this year's playoffs if their defense can really play on the same level that Hellebuck played, during the regular season. So I love the pick, and yeah, as a jaded Ottawa Senators fan, I can only imagine the gritting of your teeth, as well as everyone else in Sens Nation, watching his success with another franchise.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That didn't help either that he was kind of like the content darling of the Senators when he was here too. Like he was always the first one to do interviews, first one to, if the team's putting out a TikTok or whatever, like, yeah, sure, I'll do something stupid. Like just has no ego about himself. Like he's an easy guy to like. And
why would you want that guy in your team?
Exactly. They haven't phoned me up to be GM of the Senators yet, so it's weird. But here we are on our podcast, though. We'll tell them our opinions from afar.
No, you know what? It's okay. Like I said, hopefully they'll pick it back up, and they'll be able to keep some of the Dylan DeMellos of the world on their rosters to make everyone happy in Sensland. So
always next year, the motto of your Ottawa Senators.
And again, always next year seems to be the motto of both Ontario teams, because as we know, the Toronto Maple Leafs keep saying it. There's always next year. Wait till next year. Is always next year. So they're the last team that we'll cover tonight. And I mean, where do you start with, who's going to take up that mantle of being the driver behind the Toronto run to the Cup?
Yeah.
Because I was just going to say, we all know that Austin Matthews has had his demons in the playoffs, but he seemed to exercise some of those last night with that, go ahead goal. But yeah, I mean, you've got a lineup full of guys who have just underperformed at the biggest times. And I'm anxious to hear who your selection is here, because obviously you got to put your bias aside. You got to put your, objective hat on, and let's see what you came up with.
Yeah, well, I've got pick of the litter here because I've gone one goalie, one blue liner, one forward, so I can go in
very diverse offering.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it's pretty simple, and they are. If Edmonton is kind of the offensive dynamo of the West that has had for years questions on the blue line and in nets, you could say all the exact same things about the Toronto Maple Leafs. No one is doubting their ability to score when you've got players like Matthews, Nylander, who's on a wanted poster somewhere. Like there's a whole podcast segment we could do about him at some point, but we'll maybe wait until some more of the narratives come out, because that one smells a little bit funny there to me.
Yeah, it's a little strange for sure.
Yeah. And Marner, Tavares, like they've got no shortage of offensive weapons. Blue line, you can kind of poke some holes in it, and there's obviously some people who need to step up on that back end if they're going to go anywhere. And I think it's kind of been the same old story year after year with that defense core of like, is this the year they're finally going to take that next step? And lots of goals up front, but can the back end, duct tape and hopes and dreams holding it together get us through? But to me, it's the goaltending by a country mile. So Ilya Samsonov here. And for those who haven't followed the story, like, he has been on an absolute whirlwind this entire season, as far as high of highs, low of lows. Is he ever even going to continue playing in the NHL? Like, mentally, essentially broken down to the darkest place he could be and built back up, and goes on this nice run, and he has all his teammates kind of clapping back at the media as far as like, yeah, you guys aren't doing a great job of allowing players to right the ship when they do have things go wrong. But this is a guy who has a ton of talent. We saw it last year in flashes. We saw it when he was in Washington. We've seen him, even as a junior playing for the Russian teams and whatnot as well, too. Like, he is a bona fide, legitimate number one for a lot of teams in the NHL. But the consistency is not there. That's why Washington eventually was willing to move on from him. That's why there were doubts about whether he's going to be able to hack it in Toronto. And now here we are in the postseason, where, again, you've got Austin Matthews, who goes out there and nearly pots 70 goals there this season. Probably highest expectations in a while. They exercised the demons last year, finally getting past the first round before quickly being eliminated in the second round. So they've got that proverbial monkey off their back. So if you're looking at them just objectively as a team, what is the one ingredient that this team needs if they want to go on a run? It's goaltending.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, this is really reminiscent of the old Ilya Bryzgalov saga, right? Yeah. Like, you've got a guy who's a perennial Vezina contender, but then all of a sudden it's like, where'd he go? What's happening? And then it's like he's saying a bunch of weird stuff in the media. It doesn't seem like he really cares about the game of hockey. And then he'll come back and dominate for a stretch, and then he's gone, right? So 100%, I think that Samsonov really is the only story that Toronto should be focusing on, to say, if we're going to do anything this year, he's got to be the guy that takes that step up. But I mean, like I said, there's so many people in the Toronto organization that kind of deserve this. You need to take the next step or else, right? I mean, because you could talk about Mitch Marner. Like, where's Mitch Marner? Even last night.
You saw the flyby highlight there where they cut out and was making the rounds on Sports Center and all that. Like, those are the types of things that in a vacuum, who cares? He didn't finish a check there, or he avoided contact. But
this is the Boston.
This is his MO. This is his MO, right? Like, if he starts doing that over a couple of games, that's how you lose a 7-game series.
Absolutely. And like, this is the Boston Bruins. Like, yes, you exercised your demons last year, not against Boston.
Mhm.
You haven't beaten Boston in a series since what, 1959? Like it's
Before I was
yeah,
on the
like
right side of this world.
it's absolutely incredible how you can't raise your game up in a series like this, right? And watching a little bit of that game last night, I flip flopped on who I was going to pick because I assumed that you were going to go down the goaltender route, so I put a couple extra names on there. And the one guy who was really standing out to me for all the best reasons was Jake McCabe.
Look
Like,
at you.
he played such a physical brand of hockey last night that I think really got Toronto back on the positive side of things after they got down 2-1. He was physical. He was playing the puck smartly. He got the puck out of their zone when he needed to. And ultimately, whenever he was on the ice, you didn't see too many guys from Boston going in the corners to go fight for those pucks because they knew he was coming with the lumber.
Mhm.
And again, we talk about what type of personality helps teams win in the playoffs. That's it, especially when you're playing a team like Boston who brings it, right? No one's ever going to say that, you play Boston in a series, you aren't going to leave with bruises
Yeah.
because they're going to leave with some. And even Marchand came out last night after the game and said that was a different Toronto team than we played in the past. Like they had a different persona about them, and ultimately, I think it was because of Jake McCabe. Like he galvanized a lot of those guys because of the way that he was just throwing his body around. He looked fantastic. He
Mhm.
looked like when he first came in the league, and he was kind of that next one up before he obviously had that catastrophic knee injury. He looked like that guy again last night. And if he can kind of raise his level up and become that secondary blue liner next to Morgan Riley, Toronto can actually make some waves here. And especially if they get that goaltending, like you're mentioning with Samsonov, this is a different team than in years past. So we'll see. Obviously, it's a small sample size. They're tied 1-1. They got to be feeling good going back to Toronto. But if they can get consistency out of guys like Jake McCabe and Ilya Samsonov, I wouldn't be surprised to see them, making that deep run that I'm sure Toronto fans are just clamoring for. So yeah, let's see where that one goes. That was actually a very good game to watch last night because both teams played very sound hockey.
Yeah, and kudos to you on going deeper down the depth chart than just number one defenseman
Quinn
who's
Hughes.
probably winning the North this year.
Listen, I had to make up for it, but like I said, there was it was one of those things where I was looking at where Vancouver really could have used, someone as a catalyst. And yeah, you know what? I panicked. I just said the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, kudos to me for digging a little deeper and going on the second or third pairing with Jake and Kate.
There we go. Love it. Love it.
All right. Well, sticking with Toronto because obviously, as we mentioned before, there's always something going on in the sport capital of Canada, and let's go back to baseball. We haven't talked about baseball in a while here, so
Yeah.
Toronto Blue
Well,
Jays are
in
starting.
our defense, the Blue Jays haven't given us a lot to talk
They
about.
haven't, but again, recently they've started to kind of ascend back up. So I
Yeah.
mean, this is kind of what we wanted to talk about. So the Toronto Blue Jays, they're up and down start to the season. Obviously, we're getting towards the end of the month, so they've really got their first full month of baseball under their belt so far. First impressions on how they've looked thus far, Mr. Skinner.
Well, as we approach May, you kind of start getting a feel for what you've got on your teams, right? This is typically the time of year where in years past in baseball, at least when they had the, game served and all of that, people would manipulate the rookie contracts and got to send them back down to the minors for a couple of weeks as they're not major league ready, only so that they can save an extra year on that contract. With the new rules in place, you're seeing a lot more people kind of break out and break camp with the big league clubs, which is nice to see. But, Toronto is probably a team that I think needs to take a look at going that route because, as you mentioned, up and down start to the year, right? At home, they're 6-3 right now. So they're doing great there. 500 on the road. So 13-10 overall. Obviously, they've got a game tonight. So adjust their record how you please in the morning when you listen to this here. But they've had some pleasant surprises for sure to start the
Yeah.
season. You look at, Jose Barrios has turned into that bona fide ace
Lights out.
that they thought they were acquiring when they got him from Minnesota, right? And so he has been a pleasant surprise, but with every good, there's been that's unfortunate. Kevin Gossman has been shelled in a few of his outings. So their presumed number one ace, not off to a great start, but they've at least had someone to step up and obviously take his place. And that's kind of what you need at the beginning of the season is stay above 500, avoid some catastrophic injury as, pitchers get stretched out and all of that. And that's how you can start piecing things together as people work through their early season slumps. Dalton Varsho is another one who has come out of the gates absolutely on fire here. 6 home runs already. He's turned into very quietly, maybe not so much in Canada where most of the coverage is the Toronto Blue Jays, but if you're living south of the border, probably don't hear a whole lot about him, but he is one of the best defensive outfielders, putting up web gems every time he patrols the field there, seemingly. And, so he's been another really pleasant surprise. But I think you kind of are seeing what we talked about already, where they just didn't do enough in the off season to get off to that blistering start that I think they would have liked to have, right? Justin Turner's been serviceable on offense, but you essentially have to DH him because he's a liability out there on defense, and rightly so. I think he's what, 39, turning 40, I think. So you got to take the good with the bad there, right? So you get good out of Turner offensively, defensively, he's a black hole. So every single thing the Blue Jays have kind of done thus far, and it's reflected in their record where they're 3 games above 500 right now, has been you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
Start off on a bit of a cold streak, but now they've won 4 series in a row. Haven't got any sweeps in that time, but if you start stacking up series win, that's how you eventually pull away over the course of a 162 game season.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the teams they're beating in these series now too. Like these are not the bottom feeders, right? Like they're beating the Yankees,
Padres, Yankees,
they're beating
Rockies,
the Padres,
Mariners.
Exactly.
These are the teams they need to beat.
Yeah. And 100%. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with how your assessment of this has been, because I actually made a list of the good and the bad. And a lot of the names that you just mentioned are the good. I mean, yes, they didn't do a whole lot in the offseason, but I think the guys they brought in have really been the good part of what we're looking at with Toronto. Because I mean, you mentioned, Justin Turner, he's 308, batting average with a 905 OPS with 11 RBIs. Like that's a good, solid DH, right? Yes, he might not bring you the gold glove, that he used to have in LA, but again, it's 39. You can't expect that.
Yeah.
Barrios, guy's been lights out. Yusei Kikuchi, again, who knew that he had this in him? He's pitching lights out too. He's a bona fide top 5 starter. 2.35 ERA, 2.08 ERA, a 29 strikeout to 8 walk ratio. I mean, that's fantastic. So what you're missing with Gossman, you're actually getting with Kikuchi. Dalton Varsho, you mentioned, he's actually second in the majors right now with 14 runs scored. So he's doing everything you're asking him to do, as well as kind of being the guy you traded, those 2 really good prospects for to come back to Toronto. So good to see him taking the next step up.
The rare win-win for both teams there too, because Lourdes Gurriel and Moreno are doing fantastic and are huge pieces of why Arizona is doing as well as they are.
Absolutely. And I mean, losing Moreno was big. Like, he's not swinging as hot of a bat this year so far, but I mean, obviously he's such a great defensive catcher. Those guys are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. You can count on one hand how many legitimate offensive catchers there are in the entire major leagues. Like, unless you're Adley Rutschman or something like that, like you're essentially back there to pitch frame and, make sure that you call a good game.
Yeah. And but you look at some of these other unheralded guys like Isaiah Kiner Falefa. Like, who knew that this
Good
guy
for
was?
you for getting through that pronunciation there, because if you remember me, I just went with IKF there because of my
Yeah,
pronunciation dyslexia.
yeah. But I mean, you look at his numbers, and yeah, what he brings, what they signed him for, what he brings to the table is that solid Gold Glove defense. That's great. It's perfect. But now he's giving you a 260 batting average. He's hit 5 extra base hits, and he's actually scoring some runs. So I mean, when you're having a guy like that who's kind of in the 8 to 9 hole, who's going to give you that solid defense, he's not striking out a bunch. He's getting on base and he's scoring runs. Like, you can't ask for more than that. And if he can kind of keep that level of consistency, then hey, that's exactly what they've been looking for with that infield, right? Again, 2 pitchers to kind of round out the good. The Cuban sensation, Yariel Rodriguez. They obviously started him off in Buffalo and brought him up recently. And I think you're seeing why he was such a hot commodity coming over to the States, because this guy looks like a legit either, fourth or fifth starter, or, they're talking about moving him back to the bullpen now, but his stuff is absolutely electric when he's on. I mean, a couple of appearances, so you can't really, use this as a full sample size, but I mean, a 2.35 ERA, 13 strikeouts to 3 walks, and ultimately, he's been exactly what you wanted him to be. He's come in, started 2 games. He's only pitched 4 innings in each game. But I mean, the fact that you're throwing him out there against a team like the Yankees and he's shutting them down, that bodes well for him, because if he can come in and pitch at Yankee Stadium or at the Rogers Center against a team like the Yankees, against a team like the Red Sox, and even, records notwithstanding, these are teams that you have to perform well against, because the aura of their, the history of their franchise just kind of overlooks everything, right? So 100%, love what I'm seeing out of him so far. And then I think the unsung hero of the entire team this year is Yimi Garcia. Like, obviously Jordan Romano started the season off on the injured list, so you're missing your closer. It's kind of been closer by committee, but this guy has been the most dominant reliever in all of baseball the first month of the season. He's got a 0.89 ERA, a 0.29 whip, which I don't know if you don't understand what that is, but that's basically walks and hits per inning pitched. Anything under 1 is considered elite. He's at 0.29. So you look at pretty good.
Pretty good.
And then to top that off, he's got a 14 strikeout to 1 walk ratio. So a 14 to 1 ratio, which is fantastic. So that's the good that's been with the Toronto Blue Jays. So I mean, you've got a good solid 7 guys there that you're looking at as being, performing above expectations. And now the bad, because obviously we've seen it, right? So I'll go with the kind of so-so, but I mean, you've got some big bats in your lineup that have been kind of quiet so far, like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., just like last year, started off a little bit slow. He'll pick it up over time. He's too good of a hitter to be, play like this the whole season. But this is disappointing when you're looking to get off to that hot start. You need your catalyst, your big bat, to really kind of be that person. I mean, 226, 18 strikeouts to 14 walks. So, I mean, he's getting on base, but he's striking out at a pretty high clip right now. George Springer, I mean, I don't know what we can expect out of him. He's getting up there in years. But
I think father time is unfortunately catching up with him there in a big way.
He's batting 210, so not great. Only batting, he's only knocked in 4 RBIs so far this year. So, kind of mediocre results. But again, good clubhouse guy, good leader. You want a guy like that in your lineup. But is it time now to say, do we put him out there every night? Can we put him out there every night and trust that he's going to perform? Do we move him down in the lineup a little bit, as opposed to having him hit in the top spot or the second spot?
And that's where, again, some of the Blue Jays inactions this offseason are starting to catch up with them, right?
It hamstrings them.
Because you would love to be able to have that positional flexibility of, like, you know what? Let's have Springer DH tonight, right? Well, now you're taking Turner's bat out of the lineup, because Turner is certainly not going to the outfield there, right? So then who are you moving around in the infield, and probably shipping him off to third base? Because if you put him at first base, then all of a sudden Vladdy's getting, like, it's just this domino effect of they've got pieces, but do they work in
Yeah.
unison? That's still to be seen there. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the Blue Jays fans are a little bit frustrated, because this is what they said the whole offseason. And through the first, 25 games of the year, it's kind of like, well, we told you so.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, the lack of depth is definitely kind of showing right now, but who knows? There's still a long season ahead. People know that you can call guys up, you can, prospects will do really well. You bring them in, they'll inject some life into the lineup. You'll make these trades, acquire guys off waivers. That's how it works. So, but I think the most disappointing bat this year has to be Alejandro Kirk. This guy is renowned as being not the best defensive catcher. He's good at framing pitches and calling a game, but he's not going to throw out a runner for the life of him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of limited in that regard. But what really got him to this point has been his bat. He's a reliable hitter. He hits for average, not just power. He's hitting 179 in April.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you don't have Danny Jansen, that luxury to fall back on, you're the guy. And if you can't go out there consistently and actually, do what you're paid to do, which is swing the bat. We're not asking you to steal bases. We're not asking you to, to throw a guy out at second. You're there to catch a game and to swing a bat, right? And I mean, you've only scored one run. Like we talk about Dalton Varsho, who scored 14. Alejandro Kirk's been hitting in the 5 to 6 spot all year, which is a prime spot to drive in runs and score runs. And you only crossed the plate one time. Like that's not good. And again, he's got more strikeouts than walks on the season so far. So again, long season. Hopefully he can pick it up. But the last thing I'll touch on is the once dominant bullpen of the Blue Jays that was the envy of every team in the league really hasn't been the envy of the league so far in April. And I won't talk about their numbers because like individually they're terrible. Just as a collaborative effort, Bowden Francis, Tim Meza, and the recently returned Eric Swanson. Wow. Between the three of these guys, you're looking at an over 10 ERA. They're 0-4, or sorry, 2-4, because Bowden Francis has 2 lucky wins that he got crushed, but was just happened to be in at the game when they were in the lead. And they're giving up home runs like crazy. I think between the three of them, they've given up 8 home runs so far. Yeah. So you look at some of the things that are troubling. So you look at your big bats, your catcher, which again, probably need to address that sooner rather than later if Jansen's going to be out any longer. And then your bullpen, because and that's why I think they're moving a guy like Rodriguez back to the bullpen, because you have to. You can't keep trotting out these guys. Like call up Nate Pearson, give him a legit shot in the bullpen. Get Rodriguez in the bullpen. Send Francis down. He's obviously overwhelmed here. Meza, he's one of your only lefties that you've got, so you have to keep trotting him out there, and hopefully he can kind of catch what he had last year. But yeah, I mean, the Jays are what they are. I think that they're exceeding expectations slightly, because I think people really had a pretty low sense of confidence in them leading into this year. So the fact that they're above 500, the fact that they're playing plus baseball at home, and the fact that they're actually playing well against teams in their division bodes well for them long term. Like they're beating the Tampa Bays, they're beating the Yankees. That's what you want, right? Yeah, you're going to have the hiccups every now and again against these teams. Like, tonight with the Royals, they're down 3-2 right now. And, who knows if they're going to be able to, get out of that hole with the way that their offense is performed. But, yeah, I think overall, I'm actually fairly happy with where they are today, because the guys like Bichette, Guerrero, like they're going to pick it up eventually. And once they do, they get Danny Jansen back, then their lineup starts to take more of a shape, and hopefully they can get more of these, bodies into their lineup, so that way they don't have to rely so heavily on rolling guys like Justin Turner and George Springer out there in the field every night.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it too, right? As you look at the kind of landscape of that AL East right now, every team is above 500.
As per usual.
Absolute buzzsaw. Like as a Red Sox fan, flabbergasts me that all of a sudden, you got Cutter Crawford and, Tanner Hook and all of them of the world here are turning into
staff,
Cy Young candidates where, honest to God, like, I don't think you could have asked even anyone in that front office, like, are you confident with this rotation? heading into the season, especially after Giolito goes down with, Tommy John surgery before anything even starts. And so, anyways, that's a whole other subject, but like they're overperforming, but you can't win the World Series in the first month and a half. You can take yourself out of playoff contention in a big way. So, even though we're kind of painting this, it's been, the bullpen sucks, the bats aren't hitting, being 13-10 as of right now, it's not a bad spot to be in, right?
No,
Right in the thick of it. And once some of their pieces start falling into place, I think that this is a team that, despite the fact that they were fairly inactive in the offseason, will still be right in it to the very, very end here. And, Jordan Romano coming back and looking like his dominant
yeah,
self there, it has been huge because, to your
huge.
point about the bullpen, it seems like such a simple thing as far as like, all right, well, he used to be in the eighth inning, he'll just be in the ninth inning. He used to be in the seventh, so it throws these guys for an absolute loop when these athletes are creatures of habit. They take the
Yep.
same route to the stadium every single day. They put on their left shoe before their right shoe, right? They have a pregame stretching routine. They have to have certain music, like the whole 9 yards. So when people are put in roles that they're not accustomed to, this is what's going to ultimately end up happening, right? And so if you can get someone like Romano comes back, and I personally thought they were going to ease him back into it, like, oh, okay, rebuild your kind of strength and all of that, but no, first appearance, save, right? Goes out there and racks it up, and so I think that's going to have a huge calming effect. Obviously, super rocky start for some of those back end bullpen guys there, but everyone's sort of moving to where they're supposed to be in that kind of end of game situations. I think we'll start to see those ERAs start coming back down to earth a little bit more. Maybe they're able to keep the ball inside the ballpark a little bit better than they have as well too, because the long ball has been absolutely crushing them. And then you kind of already addressed it, some of those quiet bats, right? Like one bat that is not quiet whatsoever. Triple A, the hottest player in Triple A baseball right now, because Baltimore's called up all of their studs. So guess what? Orelvis Martinez, 15-game hit streak, 6 homers in his last 7 games. The plan was to always call him up this year, but most scouts were kind of thinking, maybe closer to the All-Star break. He is tearing the cover off the ball. And what he also brings is a lot of positional versatility. He can play third, he can play short, he can play second base. So adding a bat like that to the lineup, again, a nice little injection of talent that the Blue Jays still haven't played that card yet. But I would almost venture a guess if he hits another, home run in their next series, maybe even by the time, next week's episode rolls out, we're going to be talking about, and Martinez has made his major league debut for the Blue Jays. Like he's that close. He is MLB ready. And I think that's going to be a name that Jays fans need to familiarize themselves with over the coming weeks.
100%. And I think that not only Jays fans, but I think baseball fans, baseball writers, every single person involved with baseball knows this gentleman's name right now.
Yeah.
And he's the first person to talk about, because like you mentioned, Baltimore's already called up their absolute all-star squad from AAA. So yeah, I think Orelvis Martinez is definitely on the way up very, very soon, which could alleviate a lot of these problems that we're talking about. Because I think with that, you can now move Cavan Biggio full time to the outfield, not have George Springer have to go out, not have Kevin Kiermaier have to go out every night as an everyday outfielder, because again, they're getting older. It's not easy to play on turf. Gives them a break. Maybe that'll wake up the bat a little bit, without having to play the field and have that extra added stress on there. So I think that this opens up a lot of versatility for them, as well as getting another big bat in the lineup, which they sorely need right now. Maybe that's the kick in the ass that Guerrero and Bichette need, is getting this young guy who's kind of nipping at their heels to be the next, face of the franchise, coming up and doing what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, guess what? Everyone did Moneyball back in the day. They made a whole movie about it. They wrote books about it. Everyone copied the Oakland A's. Well, guess what? Everyone's kind of moving towards that. That old school mentality of, well, we'll see you when you're, 25, right? Like these guys are getting fast tracked. And you look at the Angels last year, called up a boatload of prospects and in their last ditch effort to try and make the playoffs to convince Otani to stay, and backfired in that regard. But a lot of those players they called up are still with their MLB squad today. And so, the Jays haven't dipped their toe in that very much so far, right? You look at Tiedemann and you look at Martinez, some of their top prospects didn't even really think twice about letting them break camp with the team. They kind of knew, no, you're going to AAA Buffalo and your time will come. Well, I think Mr. Martinez is knocking at that door.
Yeah. And I mean, let's just hope that along with the two gentlemen that you just named, there's kind of a wild card in that situation with Alek Manoah. And if he can, keep on his trajectory, because he's been getting better week after week that he's been down there.
That being said, if you're comparing apples to apples here, it's like, all right, he went from 12 ERA, then he's down to about like 8.75 now. So
listen,
baby steps.
It's a long season, and I'm not saying call him up tomorrow, but the more that this guy can get his confidence back, I think that you'll be able to see him at least come in and be an innings eater for them, because that's what you're really missing with that fifth position right now in the starting pitching rotation, is that fifth starter who can go in and be serviceable.
Yeah.
Because like I said, Bowden Francis has been kind of the bullpen long reliever who's kind of been a spot starter for them. He ain't it. So let's try and work something else in there where we can have another arm come in and kind of be that steadying presence, in that bullpen, in the starting pitching rotation. Because like until Gaussman gets his stuff back together, you've got Barrios and Kikuchi holding it down, and Bassett's still going to be steady Eddie in there. Don't have to worry about him. So it's just that number 5 spot right now that I'd be worried about. But yeah,
I love that Yelp review there that you just provided. That ain't it. 1 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend.
Yeah, do not recommend at all. Like I said, I've seen enough of him. He's been in 4 games or 5 games, and I haven't liked what I've seen in any of those games. So
you're just that meme of the big Amish guy, the Mets fan with the big thumbs down in the stands right now.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, because we've been talking a lot of Toronto, and since we both live in the nation's capital, we had some news come out of Ottawa with the local CFL team that was a little bit unfortunate, because we had our very promising running back just go down with a season-ending Achilles injury, and I mean, you hate to see stuff like this anytime it happens during a season.
Yeah,
it's even worse when it happens before training camp even starts.
Yeah,
right, off-season workouts. So the Red Blacks are in a position right now where obviously they're trying to kind of put the pieces together to roll out a successful offense last year after the last couple of seasons that have just been abysmal. Right. And the one shining star that you had coming into the season was your running back, and you don't have that anymore. So, where do you think Ottawa's kind of sitting right now in regards to where they're looking in regards to their offensive, spark that they need?
It's a little bit bleak in terms of, honestly though, like how do you replace 1,000 yards rushing, 3 TDs on the ground, 300 more yards through the air? Like he was on a very long and sometimes painful to watch season for Ottawa last year. Very much a bright spot, right? So I think they go one of 2 ways here. And all of that is going to be largely dependent on who they ultimately name as their starting quarterback, right? If you end up with, Drew or Masali back there, who are more kind of traditional, well, Masali at this point of his career, kind of pocket passers, I think you kind of just overhaul the playbook and you get a little bit more pass happy with it. And, if you're planning on rushing it 15 to 20 times a game, maybe it's now, 10 to 12 times a game. Or you go the other route and you go, guess what? Dustin Crum, who was probably the other lone bright spot for the team. Are we going to start designing a whole bunch more of RPOs and use his legs, which is probably his best skill set, a little bit more? Because you look at the running back room behind Devonte, like it's not a murderer's row out there. So it's a lot of unproven commodities. So I don't know, barring some sort of last minute training camp invite that is going to get announced here, and it's a former veteran, right? Like they've got some names that are in there that had a cup of coffee with the NFL, and so we'll see what ultimately comes of that. But I think before you really can make a definitive answer on that, it's what style of quarterback are you going to have under center? Because that'll dictate by and large what are you doing on offense and what kind of schemes you're drawing up.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good point by you, because it really does depend on the type of scheme that you're really trying to run. But let's just assume that Drew Brown is the starter going into camp and going into week 1, because that's why you went out and paid him the money that you paid him, and made the move to have the negotiation rights before he went to free agency. So, I mean, you look at you kind of mentioned that they've had a couple of guys with some cups of coffee in the NFL. The one guy who probably would have been the leader in the clubhouse going into this would be Jackson Bennett, but he just announced his retirement.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I mean. The running back room is quickly thinning out here at this point.
But I mean, again, there are some good positive names in here that I think could really break out as a result of this injury. And I mean, I think the person you were referring to who had a cup of coffee with the Jacksonville Jaguars was Raquel Armstead, running back out of Temple. He's got kind of a big body. He's like 6'1", 225. He's built for the short yardage type of run, right? He's not, so he's not going to be the second and long. He's going to run a route out the flat. He's going to line up one-on-one against a linebacker. That's not
a ton of bubble screens in his near future there.
No, that's not what he's there for. He's a straight ahead guy. If you need 2 to 3 tough yards, get Raquel Armstead in there. You've got Tyler Hodgson out of North Dakota. So I mean, again, undrafted rookie. He's an American. Who knows what he brings to the table, because obviously the transition from the NCAA to the CFL is a big one. And people don't understand that. The field is different, the lineup is different, the yard off the ball is different, where you line up in the backfield is different. So it's a big learning curve, especially when you're coming from a school like North Dakota. You typically have to spend at least a year or two to get accustomed to playing the Canadian style of game. So you got a local product, Amilcar Polk, who I had the pleasure of watching. He's a U Ottawa guy. This guy's explosive. So if he could transition the explosiveness that he showed in college, and really I think they were kind of slotting him in as a special teams guy to start, but he can be maybe that pass catching running back that can come in on second and long and take over for a guy like Armstead if you want to have that lightning and thunder combination. So again, keep an eye on him, because again, he's a non-import, so he helps the ratio out a little bit as well. But here's an interesting name that I think a lot of people need to pay attention to in training camp, because I got to see him in university. I think that he is exactly the type of running back that can excel in the CFL. He reminds me a lot, and I don't know if you remember this name, but Corey Sheets, of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and then Kylan Hill out of Ole Miss. Again, this guy, if you haven't seen any highlights, go watch some highlights on YouTube right now. Stop the show, come back, and don't forget to subscribe to the Dine Sports YouTube page.
I love your ability to work that into every episode now. You're just a natural at that.
That's what I'm here for, man. There's always a way to do it. So Kylan Hill is exactly the type of runner that you've seen come up from the NCAA and excel in a CFL system. So he's a name that I would definitely look at as the underdog, but can ultimately be the big game running back that can take over and be that next 1,000-yard rusher, diamond in the rough that you seem to find every year. So, I mean, all is not lost, now that, we've kind of gone over the whole injury. But yeah, it's obviously, like I said, it's devastating whenever you have a breakout star like Devonte was last year. But now, obviously, with his Achilles injury, he's gone until next year. So, wish him a speedy recovery. We hope that he comes back and he's the same player that he was last year. But between the gentlemen that they have in the running back room right now, and we'll see what happens with the draft, and we'll see what happens right before camp when they bring up some more important players. Let's have a good battle between these fellas, and may the best back win, so to speak.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting in training camp for sure. And they did, good news, right? To put a little cherry on top of things, they did just announce that Williams' Achilles surgery was successful, so expected to make a full recovery. So wishing him all the best as he goes through that rehab process now.
Yeah, for sure. But and I mean, keeping on theme with football, and this will be the last thing that we kind of cover tonight. And obviously, the NFL draft is coming up on Thursday night. And if you weren't aware, tune in on Thursday to the Dine Sports YouTube page, as Kyle and I will be performing a live stream breakdown analysis of every pick that's made throughout the night. And if you're tired of hearing Mel Kiper and the ESPN NFL Network gluttony of just absolute misinformation, ruining picks, tune into Dine Sports for Thursday night and listen to us kind of yuck it up. But
throw on the actual draft in the background, hit mute, and just listen to us break down everything there. The real insiders north of the border.
You don't even have to look at our faces. We'll put on the paper bags if you want. Just tune in, have the draft on, listen to us over the audio waves. But anyways, some Canadian content going into the draft. Obviously, we've covered the guys who were at the combine. Wish them all the best of luck. But wanted to talk about three more guys who have some Canadian ties that are in the draft that really kind of are in unique situations, because you don't see these things happen very often. So the first is actually a CFL player who just happens to be in the NFL draft, who knows how that works, but you got a season of pro football under his belt. Now he's in the NFL draft. Quantez Stiggers played last year for the Toronto Argos and was absolutely phenomenal. Was the rookie of the year last year. And again, he's a really, fantastic corner prospect who's been rocketing up draft boards over the last month. Mel Kiper is all over this guy. I mean, say what you want about Mel Kiper. Yeah, he has some outlandish takes every now and again, but the guy does study a lot of film. He knows every player in the draft. Been doing it for over 40 years, and he's identified Quantez Stiggers as one of his, unsung heroes of this draft, and really kind of slots him in that 4th to 5th round range. So that would be really cool, because the story itself is kind of unique. You don't really see this happen, that often, if at all, right?
Well, you look, like you said there, his father passes away in a car accident, takes a year off, was originally going to go to college, took some year off there. Then COVID happens, right? Yeah. So suddenly there isn't football. Now all of a sudden he's, in the 7-on-7 fan control football league. Then he's in the CFL while simultaneously being in the NFL draft, winning rookie of the year. Like, it's wild. Like, if ever there's a Disney executive who's like, all right, we need a storyboard, a new film here, we're short on ideas, like Stiggers could be one that gets a book written about him someday or something.
Yeah, my question is, if Disney picks it up, who is Dennis Quaid going to play?
Yeah, I don't know. He'll be probably his agent or something at some point there.
But yeah, I mean, that would be such a cool story to see him, get drafted. Just because, like you said, father passing away, COVID happening, having football kind of taken away from him, going to this fan-controlled football league, which, on paper sounds like the most fun in the world, but I can see being a little bit of a headache and liability. And
Hail Mary, 70-yard field goal attempt. Cool. All right, this is making a lot of sense.
Quarterback sneak, Hail Mary. Yeah. But yeah, it'd be really cool to see him get drafted and, come in and have that ability to work within a professional organization that no other prospect in this draft possesses, right? And yeah, and then we've got, two U Sport athletes who are in the draft this year, and they just so happen to be on the same team and also happen to be on the same offensive unit, as we've got the left and right tackle for the UBC Thunderbirds, Theo Benedette and Giovanni Manu. And I don't know if anyone has actually seen the highlights of their pro day that they actually had at BC Place, but both of them performed very well. But I just need to highlight Giovanni Manu is the largest person I think I've ever seen who's in as good a shape as he's in. The guy is 6'8", 350 pounds. He ran a sub 540.
Which is ridiculous for those who can't quite wrap their head around it.
If you, and again, think about this, the top time ever in the history of the NFL Combine was just broken this year. It's 4.21 to Xavier Worthy.
Mm-hmm.
Xavier Worthy's 165 pounds.
Yeah.
200 pounds on top of that, and it's only 0.7 of a second slower.
Yeah. Big objects like that aren't designed to move that fast.
No. And I mean, the fact that he's got the size behind him, he's athletic, he's got, a good, solid, profile, but then he also has elite level coaching. And again, same with Theo Benedette, because I don't know if anybody knows the UBC program, but Blake Nill is the head coach out there. Blake Nill is one of the best Canadian coaches that you're ever going to see in college, professional, whatever. He's a legendary coach. He won Vanier Cups when he was at, St. Mary's University out in Halifax. He had a quick little cup of coffee stop in Calgary where he made multiple, Vanier Cups as well. Now he's gone out to UBC on the other coast, won a Vanier Cup out there. And, now he's pumping out NFL type prospects out of this program. Not to mention their offensive line coach is actually my former offensive line coach in my days with BC, with Dan Durazio, who, again, the fact that he's still doing it is amazing because, one, he's a brilliant technician. He's been doing it since since the late 70s. And he's honestly probably the best offensive line coach that that you'd ever get in college. So he's getting this elite level coaching, or they're getting this elite level coaching, and then they go and have this opportunity to perform at pro days. This is something you don't see a lot with Canadian prospects who come out of U Sport. So the fact that now they're talking about both these gentlemen potentially being drafted, I think Manu is kind of a lock to be drafted. It all depends on how high. Benedette's kind of that, diamond in the rough that could get drafted late. Team could take a chance on him. But again, the fact that we're talking about two guys who come from the same school, who play in the same line, who are both from the Vancouver area, this is it. Again, you talk about, a storybook. It's a great story because what better way to go through it than somebody that you've spent the last 3 to 4 years with, right?
Yeah. I don't know what they're feeding those kids out on the West Coast there. I guess a lot of salmon to create these grizzly bears on that offensive line. But my God, yeah, no, it's exciting to see as well too, right? Because on top of the gentleman that we were already talking about on the draft preview show there, right? You got a couple of tight ends, you got some offensive line prospects, you've got some individuals who aren't just now fringe, if I go in the 7th round, that's kind of my ceiling. I'm hoping to get a training camp invite, undrafted free agent style player. Like, we're now at a spot where we're talking about legitimate NFL prospects coming out of Canada. And we've still got a huge way to go, not only in terms of, the training and the media coverage and all of that, but there needs to be a bit of a shift in mentality just in Canadian culture as far as, you go to any armpit population 500 little town in the US and they've got, a state-of-the-art football stadium that would put to shame, most CFL stadiums here. And the fact that they use sports as just such a community building, galvanizing thing, they've got homecoming games, they've got pep rallies, they've got this, they've got that. Like, people who don't work in sports don't understand all the things beyond wins and losses that happen. So I think hopefully with more stories like this of Canadian kids getting drafted, getting invited to NFL camps, making names for themselves, maybe some of the people who start writing the checks and all of that will start taking notice of that and realize some of the tertiary effects that sports
Mm,
has, and we start really investing in some of the things that we're doing out there to catch up to our neighbors south of the border.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I think in years past, you'd be happy if you saw one Canadian drafted
Yeah.
in the NFL. You could have upwards of 6 or 7 drafted this year.
Yeah.
Again, like you're saying, that starts the movement,
Mhm.
right? Like there's always a shift that happens, and once that shift happens, you start to see the snowball kind of roll downhill, and it becomes easier and easier and easier to really put these programs in place for these players to excel, to train, to have the resources necessary in order to achieve these dreams that they're trying to live, right? So 100%, I think that this could be a really, country defining draft for the Canadians involved. And, I'm sure we'll mention it a few times when we're talking about it on Thursday. Don't forget, tune in 8 o'clock on Thursday night, Kyle and I with the Dine Sports NFL draft stream. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this draft. It's really exciting. I really hope that you see as much movement as you think you're going to see
Mhm.
with teams moving up and down the draft boards. And yeah, I would love to see all of these guys get drafted, get a chance to go into a camp and really impress people with how good they are, because that just makes it easier for the next wave of Canadian prospects, to take the leap into the NFL. Um,
Yeah, and it has
so,
those secondary marketing effects as well too, where like, the NFL Canada series where they start following the players around and throughout the season. Like, I think Chase Claypool's been on it for like 3 seasons running right now. Like, let's cycle through some new faces, tell some new stories. And it starts with, hey, look at this big crop of, Canadian players coming through, the Theo Johnsons, the Tanner McLaughlins of the world, that are, you can start telling some unique perspectives and getting into some new audiences as well too.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, we've been kind of spoiled in Ottawa the last 8 to 10 years with how many guys have gone on to that NFL success. And yeah, it's time for a lot of these other cities to embrace that, right? Like, this is now your time. It's not just a matter of, well, they're all coming from the same spot. No, no, no. This is a pretty diverse offering. You've got some West Coast guys. You've got some guys from Quebec. You've got some guys from the GTA. You got some guys from Ottawa. Like, this is exactly how you grow these things. This is exactly how you go to these funding agents and say, look at the diversity that we're seeing in this sport, right? This isn't like, the old 1970s where you've got a couple of kids from Saskatchewan who are just big farmers and, they get a chance to go down and play. In the States, it's an offensive lineman. You got some guys from the Quebec region who go to CEGEP and they've got a couple of years of junior college under their belt who get a chance to go to a big time school down in the States and get a shot, right? Like the Tim Biakabatukas of the world. You're now seeing every single position being, being represented. Receivers, DBs, linebackers, defensive linemen, kickers, like quarterbacks. Even you're seeing with the Rourke brothers, right?
Mhm.
So 100%. I'm really excited for this, and yeah, I really hope that this is what I think it's going to do, or this does what I think it's going to do, which is really open the door for a lot more people to put their eyeballs on the state of Canadian football. And I wish them all the best of luck.
Yeah. Best of luck to all of them, and continued success to all those that are already in the league. So if you want to
Yep.
hear us talk about some more good Canadian kids trying to live out their dreams, this Thursday, 8 p.m., Dine Sports YouTube channel. Check it out.
Let's go.